Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thanks a lot for picking this podcast because there are over 2 million podcasts that exist out there in podcast land. And yet here we are, because this show is the one that is designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor now for, it's like 3 years that I get to co-host this show. Now, usually I'm here with my co-host, Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. However, sometimes I do these career-focused shows where Craig's not with me, and I always miss Craig when he's not here on the show. But today, we are going to talk about leadership and self-awareness as you look to advance your career. You know, there are so many competencies that you need to pay attention to. You need to be thinking about your technical competencies, your relational competencies, and leadership competencies so that you can thrive in your career. And yet, how do you even know where to begin? So today, I have a friend of mine here with us on the Digital Enterprise Society, and we are going to talk about how to maximize this. Wally Adamchik is a leadership expert. And what he does is he goes around and talks to people in the construction and manufacturing world all about how to improve leadership. And because he's a friend of mine, he agreed to be here today. Hey, Wally, thanks for being here.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
So, Wally, let's talk about leadership. You know, when we think about that, we think about the CEO or the director of sales or your boss. But really, we all have to be paying attention to leadership. Why is that?
Well, first, it is a cliche and a buzzword these days, particularly, and it's going to solve everything like values. But, when we talk leadership, it starts with you, right? It's not a they thing. It's not a them thing. It's not an organizational thing. It's every day I look in the mirror and I have to lead myself first. I have to exercise influence in my family, hopefully positively with my kids, as you know, and then extend that out into my team, out into my organization. So although it's a cliche that organizations want leaders at all levels, well, they need followers at all levels too, but we do want people to think and exert influence, and ultimately that's what leadership's about.
So in the introduction, I talked about sort of these different types of competencies that everyone really should pay attention to. I talked about technical, relational, and leadership competencies. Could you define what those are?
Yeah, for sure. So, technical, we mean non-transferable, right? So if you're an accountant, it's, math and GAAP and FASB, that kind of stuff. If you're a software person, it's understanding what that software does and how that software works. If I'm a carpenter, it's understanding how to, hammer a nail and put two pieces of wood together. So technical doesn't mean technology. It just means the non-transferable specific skills associated with the work or craft or trade that I'm doing every single day. In other words, if I can't do the work, I can't do anything else, right? So the challenge with those these days is that they're changing, right? If we call them means and methods and softwares and technologies, no matter what, if I'm a car mechanic, that used to be, I could, do points and plugs, but now I'm a software guy, right? So no matter what craft you're in, no matter what profession you're in, what I call the means and methods of that are changing. That's the technical side, the technical competencies that we talk.
All right. And then let's talk about the relational competencies.
Yeah. So, let's assume I'm an individual contributor. I'm an accountant. Again, I do math. Right. But then, okay, I'm probably working on a team. And then if you think about it, it's self, relationships, organization. Right. So I have to get good at being me, but then I have to get good at being we. And those are the relational competencies we talk about. Now, those may be with peers or subordinates, quote, or seniors, quote, but understanding that, am I an introvert or an extrovert, for example? And how does that track with me? We just had a group this past week, we were doing one of the final classes for a year-long leadership program we do. And this woman who's a contract manager, got up at the end of it and gave a presentation, which she would have never have done 12 months ago. But she learned how to get comfortable in this group. She learned how to step out a little bit. And she learned that although she is a, quote, severe introvert, that it's important for her to be able to, step out from time to time. So that's what I would say from a relational perspective.
And then finally, we have the leadership competencies.
Yeah, once again, a little bit of a cliche, a little bit of a buzzword, but if we stick with leadership is about change and influence, well, we can be doing that no matter where we are in the organization. But if you are in a supervisory role, then clearly we would hope that you would be able to work on those leadership competencies. But every organization I know is looking for people to step into supervisory roles, right? It's just a natural, chain of command, succession. Hopefully our business is growing perspective, and understanding what leadership looks like these days compared to, a generation or two ago, and learning to be better at those things.
So I talked in the introduction about, we were going to talk a little bit about self-awareness when it came to leadership. And so if you were listening to this podcast, and the people who listen to this podcast, they're really kind of from a giant cross-section of people, mostly working for manufacturing companies in aerospace and automotive, but really all types of companies, large and small. And a lot of them are sort of early in their career, maybe mid-stage in their career, and they're looking to advance. So if you were someone listening to this show, or if you were giving advice to them, when it came to that self-awareness about who they are and the leadership, what steps should people be taking?
Well, there's a lot, and let me just make a note here. Before I forget, 2 ideas. The first one that naturally comes to mind for me, as a paid consultant are assessments, right? Whether it's emotional intelligence, Myers-Briggs, DISC, whatever. And when we're talking with folks that are in corporate America these days, they have often, I'll use the word, been subjected to these, right? So the unfortunate thing is, when I went into someone and say, hey, have you ever done, oh yeah, I took Myers-Briggs, 2 years ago. Really? Well, what are you? I think I'm the green one. No, that's a different assessment. The point is that many folks have had these opportunities for a little bit of introspection from a scientific perspective, and they view it as simply a parlor game or a cute little exercise, when really it is foundational from a self-awareness perspective, because the science of those assessments, and some are better than others, but the science of those assessments begins to give you a language that you can then do something with. Once again, if I'm an introvert, what can I do with that? If I'm an extrovert, what can I do with that? And all too often people look at those assessments and go, oh yeah, I could have told you that. Well, why don't you do anything with that? So that's one place, is they may have been exposed to some level of assessment already. By the way, a lot of vendors or providers online that if you Google it, there's some out there that folks do for free, some maybe lower level or not as in-depth that you can find online. But the other one I'll give you, which people are really going to hate, is a personal journal, is journaling on a regular basis and putting your thoughts down on paper. Paper is better than computer for some scientific reason we still haven't quite fully understood yet. And then, and what do you put down? Well, I'm having a good day. I'm having a bad day. This excited me. This ticked me off. And when you go back over time, it's a little scary, but also a little magical when you see the themes. And then you go, that's something, that's one of my demons. That's one of my fears, right? So if you're honest with yourself through a journaling experience, and once again, you can find, 175 questions that you should journal about, whether it's a day, a week, that kind of thing. When we do coaching, that's one of the first things we get people to do, is to start journaling.
So it's interesting because I've done some of that, and I was talking to somebody last night actually about journaling, and they made an interesting comment, and I thought, oh my God, I'm the same way. So in my observation of 2, they said, I only tend to journal when things are going really well or when the stuff has hit the fan and things aren't
Mhm.
going really well. Is that common when people are sort of journaling for what's going on in their career? When their boss does something horrible and they hate her, they'll sit down and write like 5 pages in their journal about how horrible it is. Or the day they get the promotion and somebody brings them a cake, they'll journal about that. But the average days don't seem to get journaled as much. And should they be?
Well, actually, and yes, and if you think about gratitude, right? One of the things that we talk about these days is a gratitude journal, right? What are the things that are going well in your life? Because Lord knows there's enough crappy things going on the headlines, right? These days, and it's interesting when you get. If I were to ask you, hey, what went well yesterday? You might think about it and, well, it was just an average day, right? In other words, does that mean nothing went well, right? Well, wait, my plane was on time. I had food. My wife was able to pick me up at the airport, right? It was an incredibly average day with so many good things in it. So part of the exercise, Tom, is that to realize within the mundane, there's a lot of good things happening to us. Now, why does that matter, right? Well, yes, I journal the highs and the lows because those are significant things. Well, if you journal, in the mundane and, there's highs and lows within the mundane, what you begin to do is realize that there's a lot of goodness happening in your life. And let's face it, for the most of the folks watching and listening to this, they're not in Ukraine, right? They're in good places, first world kind of places that, and what happens is we take for granted so much that we have, but when we begin to look at this and we begin to journal and get some of the more positive things into us, it builds resilience, right? And when it builds resilience, it means that I can take the slings and arrows that life throws at me, right? So I'm more able to self-regulate so that I can continue to be successful. So the journaling in self-awareness is partly to say there's a lot of things that are going well in me or around me. There's, okay, this bad thing keeps happening. Or, oh, my weight. I look back, my weight is an issue, for years. Okay, well, where does that come from, right? So you really can't begin the self-awareness journey until you begin to understand, put it all out there in front of you.
Interesting. So what is the big opportunity for individuals when it comes to understanding this self-awareness and taking their own leadership reins? What are the opportunities for them?
Well, the optimist in me would say, well, the opportunities are endless, but I would say that it's the ability to begin to have small wins. I'll give you an example, right? Last fall, I gained a lot of weight. Just the way my life was happening, and I would do it again, and I hopefully can do it again this fall. And it involves watching my son play football and all these things, right? So I begin the year, and it's like, oh my God, I'm nowhere near where I want to be. So what do? I use an app, right, which is a journal of a sort, right? And I've lost 8 pounds since January 1st. Well, damn, that makes me feel good, right? And I want to continue on that, right? So I didn't lose 8 pounds in 3 months. I began to get a grip on my eating on day one. I began to get a grip on my working out. I was talking to a fitness trainer that I know, and he's, you work out this week? I said, no, I was traveling. I was only going to get there one day this week. And, you can't really make an impact on your muscles if you don't work out 3 times a week. He said, yeah, but if you worked out once a week, that would be 50 workouts this year. I'm like, ooh, you got me. Right? So, right, the micro wins, right, create a positive experience, create positive endorphins, if we want to go with that. Dopamine, all that stuff. And then that enables me to take on some of the bigger wins over time. So understanding that, okay, I didn't work out today, understanding that I didn't get that report in on time. Well, why didn't that happen? How do I stop that from happening again? And over time, we kind of get the graph going like this instead of going like this. I think that's the real opportunity for us. And again, life is harder today than it has been in a lot of ways. Gas prices are up. It's, there's stuff going on. So resilience at the personal level becomes incredibly important, for myself, health, but then for the folks around me.
So it's interesting. Resilience is a word that the last 2 years has bubbled up, in the world of speaking and training. You and I both work as professional speakers and trainers. And so, the topic of resilience has become sort of a buzzword over the last couple of years where maybe not so much 3 or 4 years ago. What is it about resilience that makes it so important, and why has it become such a popular word in business?
Well, here's another word for it. If you don't like resilience, is tenacity, right? The ability to persist, the ability to persevere, the ability to stand up when knocked down. Right now, we were all knocked down in the last 2 years. So how do I get back up? That to me is what resilience is about. And if I'm on a team, how do I, it's, when I talk to leaders, I say, look, you can have a bad day. Your team can have a bad day because you're having a bad day. Similarly, if I'm a team member, on a software team, it's how do I continue to function in the midst of this when you're having a bad day, right? So that resilience, go back to the journaling and the self-awareness, and there's so much goodness happening for me these days, becomes pretty darn important.
Well, for me, my dad always said when I was growing up and tough times would get hard, he goes, this is where you have to be scrappy. And he must have said that a million times when I was growing up. And he's been gone for over a decade. He passed away several years ago. But during the pandemic, because I made most of my income from speaking at company events and at association events, and that went to basically zero for some time, I kept hearing my father in the back of my mind saying, you've got to be scrappy. You've got to be scrappy. And I guess that sort of ties into tenacity and resilience just the same way. Is it's like, yeah, you can have a bad day, but that doesn't mean you get to sit in the corner and cry for very long. I gave myself a little bit of time to be able to do that, but you couldn't do it for 2 years. So you had to get scrappy. You had to get out there, find new ways to do it. So when you work with these teams and these construction and manufacturing companies and stuff like that, do you see like a need for that scrappiness?
Oh, well, yeah. Because that I think is part of the opportunity, right? Is how do we become proactive instead of reactive? Now, let's face it, we all went into react mode on March 13th, 2020 or something like that.
Yeah, everybody knows the date, March 13th. Yeah. That's sort of the given date of when everything stopped.
Yes, it's when the Players Championship in golf was canceled. That's when you knew, and the NCAA, that's when you knew it was going bad. Because and this is where, again, the self-awareness and the leadership people, I just keep coming back to it, but that self-awareness to say, okay, I can influence what is happening in my team, in my organization, in my family, right? Now, let's face it, some of us are more optimistic, some of us are more pessimistic, for whatever reason, whether it's a mama's house story or a DNA story, whatever. But to your point, okay, you can go sit in the corner for a couple of days and weep and whimper, but you have to get back on the horse, right? So this scrappiness, this tenacity, this resilience, there really are two choices at that point, right? That's the classic, you're growing or you're dying. I don't really like that cliche, but it was absolutely true. If you look at our trade association, 50% of the members disappeared because they were not able to retool and do some of those things.
Yeah, he's referring to the National Speakers Association that he and I both belong to. And as you can imagine, for those of you listening, people who made a large portion of their living speaking to live audiences, their businesses, that was it. And so, yeah, we know a lot of people who did it. What's nice for people who worked for larger companies is while there was a lot of struggle and a lot of change, for most people, they were able to find ways to move forward. But when you worked for yourself, that was a little bit harder.
Well, you talk about people working for larger companies, the work from home phenomenon or fiasco, again, depending on your organization, right? And again, many of our listeners here today have been thrust into that work from home environment. And, we're still, I think, trying to figure out the results of that experiment. And now people are coming back, maybe not willingly. And I read in the paper the other day that Apple, who I would say has a fairly unique culture and vibe, said, hey, let's come back to the office. And people are going, well, I don't want to come back to the office. And well, if you don't want to come back to the office, then is Apple anymore? Right. So it's just, these are very complex issues. And what we have seen in a lot of cases when people come back to the office, it's like, oh, I've missed you so much. Right. So I think there's an and statement in this work from home piece, that it doesn't have to be, all or nothing, but another element of this self-awareness piece of where do I do best and when do I do best?
So this also leads to a thing that I think, from my observation, and I know you think this as well, that organizations now have sort of a unique opportunity and a place to help provide that sense of belonging, if you will, to their employees, but also a place where, they can feel that community and maybe that trust and safety. So what do organizations need to do in this time of pivot as people are coming back to the office? What opportunities do organizations have to provide that, and I'm putting little air quotes up, that place for their people?
Well, to recognize that it is a place, whether it's virtual or live or some combination of both. I mean, when we look at the headlines, right? Trust in everything as an all-time low. Trust in Congress, well, that was easy. But trust in business, trust in the clergy, trust in the military. One of traditionally high trust organizations, in the eyes of the population, and all of these are lower than they've ever been. So what that means is we as Americans wake up every day a little bit suspicious, right? A little bit not as trusting as we might be because we're bombarded with, the media and et cetera. So I believe that there's an opportunity for teams or organizations. And if I'm not running the organization, I may be running the team or I may be part of a team, but I believe there's an organization, an opportunity to create what you said, that place that is a place of trust, a place of respect, a place of living our values, whatever those values are, so that when I come inside these four walls, I can be comfortable, not complacent, but comfortable. So that, what does that mean? It means I can perform at my best because I don't have to be looking over my shoulder and be suspicious and be guarded. Because when I go back outside, I'm going to be a little suspicious and a little guarded again. So that is a way to create, I believe that's the future of work, to create that opportunity, that place of, I'll use the word refuge, where people can do great stuff. And I think the organizations and the team leaders that figure that out are the ones that are going to win the people battle over the coming years.
So as we wrap this up, what's the last piece of advice that you have for people who are listening who want to advance their careers? What's the last little tidbit you'd give them?
I would say you're not done and you're not a victim, right? Meaning no matter where you are in your progression, there's probably a piece of incremental growth. Are you reading the trade journals? Are you listening to podcasts? What books are you reading? And, is your industry reading? So that would be part of the, you're not done yet on the technical side. On the relational side, right? We've talked about that one a little bit. What am I doing to stay out, stay engaged, maintain my relationships? Because we know that mental health, oh my gosh, huge impact these days. And going forward as we age, right? So what am I doing to maintain my relationships? So, you're not done and you're not a victim. And what I mean by that is if you're in a bad situation, change it. And because there's more opportunity now than there's ever been. And life is short. And I've always believed those two things, but we're obviously seeing that these days more than we've ever seen it. So you're not a victim. You're not done.
Nice. And on that relational side, make sure that you get more involved with the Digital Enterprise Society, because there are a lot of opportunities for learning. There may or may not be, I might be telling tales out of school, a live event coming up very soon hosted by the Digital Enterprise Society. So make sure that you go to digitalenterprisesociety.org and check out everything that's going on for all of our listeners. So Wally, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom. If people wanted to get a hold of you, how would they find you?
FireStarterSpeaking.com or WallyAdamchik.com. It's written right there, WallyAdamchik.com. And to anybody listening, if you want to continue a conversation at this, send me email. I'd love to get on the phone with you. There's no charge for that. It's just part of what we do. So yeah, reach out.
Awesome. And I can tell you, because Wally is my friend, he's also an all-around nice guy. Hey, thank you so much to everybody who tuned in and listened. Every single week, we try to bring to this podcast interesting interviews and ideas that will help all of you enhance and grow your careers. Join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. And always remember that the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.